The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpant, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller. If you're going to love people, then you need to step into their walking pace of life, thinking pace, and love them by not saying, hey, you need to catch up to me. You need to be at my speed. No, you need to step in and go, okay, where are they right now and how are they doing and how can I walk at their speed?
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Ben Palpant is a memoirist, poet, novelist, and writer of nonfiction. He's the author of several books, including A Small Cup of Light, Sojourner Songs, and The Stranger. His new book, Letters from the Mountain, is a collection of letters to his daughter about writing, creativity, paying attention, and generativity. Ben Palpant, I'm so glad that you are on the Habit Podcast today.
I'm so glad to be here. You have some of the coolest people in the world on this show, as I was just saying, and so believe me when I say it's entirely my honor, Jonathan.
I tell you what, I agree with you that I have some of the coolest people on this podcast. It really is a great, I'm thankful for who I get to talk to on a regular basis, and including you. So I'm thankful to be talking to you, Ben.
Thank you.
Okay, so your new book is called Letters from the Mountain. Is there a subtitle?
There isn't a subtitle.
Good. How did you? Nobody can resist a subtitle. How did you do that?
Well, honestly, it was Rabbit Room. Pete Peterson said, "I don't think we need a subtitle."
Okay.
It did have a subtitle because I can't resist it.
Okay.
I think it was something like "Wisdom for Writers," and he said that's unfair because this book applies to more than writers. So I said, "Okay, pal, I trust you."
Okay. It's also a little bit presumptuous too, right?
That's right.
Here is Ben Palpant's wisdom.
Well, the title alone, Jonathan, Letters from the Mountain, has a sort of, look at how far I am up the mountain. So, yeah.
Well, at least it wasn't Letters from the Top of the Mountain.
Amen.
Letters from the Top of the Mountain, semicolon, looking down on everybody else, or something like that. Something you could have,
That's right.
Could have considered.
Yeah, I think this is. I was just talking to my daughter Kylie, who these letters were written to, yesterday about that subtitle and the title of the book, and just the joy of knowing that your child is catching up to you and can actually be alongside you at certain points in the journey. A little bit like the story of the sick man when his friends came to help him carry him up to the rooftop and lower him down. We were just talking about how at some point I bet those other friends needed him. Once he was healed, you carry each other's pallet and you just help each other out. So I think that's where this book is really rooted. How can I help my daughter, but thereby come alongside other folks who will need to come alongside me?
Yeah. So these are literally letters to your daughter, Kylie, who's also a writer.
Yeah. Yep. She's in Scotland right now, finishing up her master's at St. Andrews. And so it's been a long journey with an inauspicious beginning. I'm not sure how far to go back. There are so many stories to tell, but when Kylie was probably 4 or 5, maybe, we went on a camping trip. So she was our only child at the time. And being poor, we generally had this little car that just couldn't handle that kind of distance. So we rented for the first time a rental car, and it was incredibly shiny, beautiful, blue car, and went out to the coast, had a great time. I gave Kylie all the rules of camping, and she did pretty well as far as I remember. But on the last morning when we were packing up, I'm rolling up sleeping bags or something, and I look out the tent, and there's Kylie drawing on the car with a rock. Oh my goodness, I've never run that fast in my whole life. So I got her up, picked her up, and she could see by my expression that, this was a big no-no, which was a complete shock to her. There's this beautiful blue canvas for her.
Yeah.
So she said, "But Daddy, I was just trying to make something beautiful." I go, great. But that's one of those moments when I think as a dad, okay, I got to give this girl some direction. And that's just led to lots and lots of conversations over the years. We have such a great friendship. She asks me questions all the time. She's watched me so much. In fact, I was just reading The Gift of Asher Lev, picked it up off the shelf this week and opened it up. And there's Kylie's little baby scrawls, because she'd watch me underlining in the book and pick it up. Yeah. So some of my best, some of my old classics, the 100-year-old books, she'll just pick them up and start underlining in them. So, so it's a treat, Jonathan.
Yeah, that's great. As I was reading your book, I kept thinking about that poem from Richard Wilbur called "The Writer," and it's the one where he's standing outside the a room where his daughter's writing a story on a typewriter. And for the first part of the poem, it's all nautical images. So like she's sitting in the prow of the house, and she's she's freighted with this story, and she's trying. It sounds like the typewriter sounds like the chains of on a ship or whatever. And he says something like, "I wish you safe passage." And then that's the first half of the poem, and then in the second half, he remembers the time a bird got stuck in that same room and it was beating itself to death, on the wall, like kind of almost literally beating itself to death, trying to get out. And they open the window for it, and they wait outside and watch and listen, and are so grateful when it makes it out the window alive. It would sort of beat itself against the glass and then kind of collapse down and wait to get its wits back about it, and then try again. And then finally it made its way out the window. And the last line is, "I wish what I wished you before, but harder." He wished her safe passage as if she were a ship. And then you realize maybe writing is more like being a bird trying to, beat your way out of a glass window. Mm-hmm. And so he wished her safe passage again. I just kept thinking, as you in these letters are talking to your daughter about here are some perils that you're going to be facing, and here are some, this is a father wishing safe passage for his daughter.
Yeah. So, and I'll add that's a beautiful picture, Jonathan. I'll add that the sense of being a bird yourself, wishing another little bird out the window adds to it, because that's how it feels. I think, in an earlier podcast, I think it was Harrison Scott Key who just said, there's very little that's glorious about this work.
Yeah.
You have these moments that you're like, wow, that's really great. Letters that come in that are just entirely surprising, that God would use your stories, your experience, and redeem them in someone's life. But really, it's just a slog. You just in Chaim Potok says in Asher Lev, you have to harness yourself to the work. So that's a very negative way of saying it, but there's a truth to it. If you don't love writing, if you don't feel like this is just the work of writing itself, if you're in this for the fame or the accolades, the praise, the money, then that's part of why I want this book to be, why I wrote it to Kylie, just to remind her that this isn't about the platform that you're supposed to make. This is about giving yourself away. So your entire life, and that's for writers, artists, non-writers, that's just the Christian calling. Give yourself away.
I love something you said in the book that I think is relevant here. You said, life is a gradual dawning on the heart and mind. A few eureka moments might punctuate a life, but most of the time we travel in relative obscurity, doing our best. So how do you write and keep writing without the eureka moments? You said there are only a few. You say there are only a few, and then you use the helping verb might punctuate a life. So a few eureka moments might punctuate a life, but man, I think of. I've been known to think of writing as sort of capturing those eureka moments. So,
I think that's true. I think those eureka moments are God's kind enough to give those to us periodically, and they're not always big. So I think there's a difference between seeking a eureka moment that is top of the mountain and something that's just a glimpse of where you're heading or of the view. So just, for full disclosure, if my dad listens to this podcast, he'll chuckle because he loves hiking. I have no desire to hike, none whatsoever. But I've hiked enough to know that that metaphor, and this is a scriptural metaphor of climbing a mountain together, Mount Zion, that those moments when you're hiking along and you just think, I just got to put one foot in front of another, you round a bend and you realize, wow, look at that view. I didn't even know I was here. Yeah. But that's beautiful. And sometimes it takes the smallest form. Sometimes it's just somebody who read your work and said, hey, you need to know this is beautiful. So my first book, a memoir on my health collapse and then subsequent working through those hard questions with God, I gave I didn't write that for anybody. I just wrote that for me because I realized I'm forgetting some of those principles that I learned along the way. So when I gave the, very rough draft manuscript of A Small Cup of Light to a friend, I just wanted honest feedback. Well, he came rushing to me the next day in tears and just said, you have to finish this book for me. I didn't really have a choice at that point because I realized this is much bigger than me. This isn't about me anymore. This is about how God's going to use this work to generate something in other people's lives that's beautiful, whatever that may be.
Yeah. And I think there's also the truth that as you plod along, the very act of writing about paying attention to the mundane and the non-eureka moments of life dignifies those moments and sort of what meaning is there finds its way out when you just tend to your business and write about that stuff.
Yeah, but it does take, Jonathan, I think an attentiveness and a heart posture that's not going to happen all by itself. So I'm forgetting who it was who said God walks among the pots and pans. Can't remember who she was, but that's just a great quote.
Yeah.
And then there's there's the moment where Jacob's fallen asleep out in the middle of the wilderness, and he's got that rock for a pillow. And then when he wakes, he has that dream, and when he wakes up, he says something akin to, "Woe is me! I had no idea where I really was.
Yeah,
this is holy ground."
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just the world we are in, and it's so easy to lose sight of that when we're in a polarized time as we are. But even with all the conflict, that doesn't change the bedrock fact that God has put us in a place that's incredibly loaded with the divine, more than we can notice. And so being awake to that, that's a calling for every Christian in every work. And some work is harder to see it in than others. But looking for the divine in all these mundane things.
Yeah. I sat next to a little girl at a school concert, the kind of school concert where different people come up and do their thing, Actually, maybe it was more like a talent show than a concert. Anyway, sitting next to this little girl, and she was, 10, 11, and she had a little notebook out, and she was just writing down what she saw. And it was, it'd be things like, these boys came up, and one of them forgot his guitar strap, so he had to go back down into the audience to get his guitar strap, and he came up. And, and then some boys came up and played, and they all had glasses except one. And, and it's just kind of whatever she saw, she wrote down. I thought, this kid gets it, that just paying attention. And I was thinking, also in 2 years, when she looks back on this, she's going to be embarrassed. But in 10 years, when she looks back, she's going to think this is great.
Yeah.
That she was just paying attention. I think about the journals I wrote when I was 19. They're so terrible because I thought I had to say smart things instead of I'm just not interested in what 19-year-old Jonathan thought was smart. But if I wish I did know who he was hanging out with, how much gas costs, whatever, Yeah.
Yeah. This is, that's so true. Yeah. So that little girl, though, she's practicing what I don't remember if this is Chesterton or Lewis. Sounds more Chestertonian, but he said that we need to practice omnivorous attentiveness. Just pay attention. So that's, I refer to that in my chapter on listening, I think, in the book, that we will notice more if we practice noticing. So even the girl, she doesn't need to be impressed she doesn't even have to go back and look at what she wrote.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's a great point.
She's practicing attention. So in 10 years, 20 years, she may not even remember that she did all that.
Yeah.
But just the habit of paying attention, it's not like, wasn't it Sherlock Holmes? When I was a kid, I read Sherlock like crazy. But he'd be able to sit in a restaurant, and at some killer moment, right, he'd be able to reveal you don't actually know what is around. You aren't noticing the little scuff of dirt on the sleeve, or how many steps you walked up that to this restaurant. That all leads to some mysterious reveal. But life isn't that, right? We're not all Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
But God has given us so much to notice, and much more than we could possibly pay attention to. But I do think there's a way that we could pay attention to it a little more, and that's going to start with gratitude. The less grateful we are, the less we're going to notice, or we'll notice the wrong things, right? The inverted picture, those strange pictures where you show it to a person and it's one person says that's an old lady, right? And then the other person says, no, it's a little girl. Look how cute she is. Yeah. Well, I think life is so much like that, and gratitude seems to be that distinguishing mark. That it's not that that painting or that drawing, they're both right? Mm-hmm. It's an old lady and it's a little girl, but the beautiful side of that is that little girl, not the gnarled, ugly, witch-like picture on the other side of it. So I think that we have plenty of chances in life to notice the abundant generosity of God and to live in that with gratitude and patience. And I don't need to be more than I am. I don't need to be C.S. Lewis or G.K. Chesterton. I get to be me, and I get to be this little, I get to offer myself to other people. You know, in the book, I refer to the nameless kid who gives away his loaves and fish to Jesus. He's, for me, the picture of this generative generosity, that we just are called to give the little we have. And I want my little girl to remember that, so that when I forget, she can remind me, Dad, all you have to do is give the little you have, and then watch God multiply it. And it's always astonishing what he can do with the little I offer.
Yeah. You use that term generative and generativity a lot. I mean, it's sort of the central idea or a central idea of this book. So what do you mean when you say generative? Tell me about that word.
Well, I got that. I stole that straight from Makoto Fujimura is an artist, a contemporary artist whose work is just staggering to me. It's a bit mysterious. It takes me a while to get an appreciation for it. But so he has used that in his book on culture care as the road toward cultivating culture rather than just thinking in terms of cultural warfare. So I see if I can remember his 3 Gs. He has that. So generative just means that it generates, right? It comes from the Latin to mean to beget something. And it begets in 3 key ways. One is that it gives Genesis moments. So it inspires in the people it encounters, whatever art, whatever writing it is, it inspires in the reader or the viewer some creative expression, whatever that form is. The second is that it's generational. So you're not thinking of just how do I hit a demographic today and get the biggest bang for my buck, but how do I make something that when these folks see it, they're going to say, I gotta show my kids and my grandkids, and they'll cherish the same thing, right? So we do that with Tolkien. We do that with Flannery O'Connor. We do that with all these writers we love. And the third one is that it is generous. So there's a gratuitous, this also is Mako, gratuitous generosity, not just here, I'll give you a token gift. It's what I can give. No, it's giving my whole self. And so generative artwork is gratuitous. When you encounter it, you just think this person's given their whole self to this work. It's not just a side slick show here. It's their whole person involved.
Yeah. So is there such thing as art that's not generative?
I think I'm going to say yes, but I think it depends on what you're defining as art. So there are some things, when you stick a urinal on a wall and call it art, I'm skeptical as to its value as art itself. So does it generate something in other people? Probably, but it's not going to generate further creativity. It's going to evoke an emotion in me that's repulsive.
Yeah.
But I think artwork is, I think it's easy, for example, for Christians in particular, to just dismiss modern art, generally speaking, and not think in terms of abstract or representational art. And so I think those are categories that I need to study more. Mako has certainly helped. Just sitting in front of his painting for 10 minutes opened up galaxies for me that I just thought, oh my goodness, this guy has captured beauty in a way that I didn't expect. And if you just walk by, you go, well, that's kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
But if you sit in it, there's something that generates in you a visceral response to beauty that's really generative.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there is art that or writing or stories that can be generative in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're going to be faithful to the Lord, the works that we're making need to evoke something deep and transcendent. I hope this is okay. I just before we got on together remembered Andrew Peterson gave me this book, Living Things by Ann Porter, and this poem in particular that he had me read when I was visiting with him. So this is connected here. It's called Music. When I was a child, I once sat sobbing on the floor beside my mother's piano as she played and sang, for there was in her singing a shy yet solemn glory my smallness could not hold. And when I was asked why I was crying, I had no words for it. I only shook my head and went on crying. Why is it that music at its most beautiful opens a wound in us, an ache, a desolation, deep as a homesickness for some far off and half forgotten country? I've never understood why this is so. But there's an ancient legend from the other side of the world that gives away the secret of this mysterious sorrow. For centuries on centuries, we've been wandering, but we were made for paradise as deer for the forest. And when music comes to us with its heavenly beauty, it brings us desolation. For when we hear it, we half remember that lost native country. We dimly remember the fields, their fragrant, windswept clover, the bird songs in the orchards, the wild white violets in the moss by the transparent streams, and shining at the heart of it is the longed-for beauty of the one who waits for us, who will always wait for us in those radiant meadows, yet also came to live with us and wanders where we wander.
Mm.
So I think that the generative art isn't necessarily going to give us these positive life feelings, but they will awaken in us a longing for the other side, for that kind of beauty.
Yeah. I think there's certainly in nonfiction and there are kinds of persuasive writing, for instance, that don't seek to open up conversation, but to shut down conversation.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree.
And that's different from the kind of generative work you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Why is it that we still read Lewis and Chesterton and those guys I was talking about? Because they provoke questions that we want to talk to others about, or we just want to keep having those conversations. And I think that's incredible prose when you can pull it off.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's so helpful to remember that there was a conversation happening before we got here, and we're joining into the conversation and hopefully inviting other people into the conversation.
That's right. Yeah. And that's one of those chapters in the book where I talk about the architecture of good writing. I had an architecture professor who laid out some of the principles of good architecture. Well, one is knowing the landscape. Mm. You can't just plop down a glass tower in the middle of Montana in the mountains. It doesn't work. The geology doesn't work, but there's a clashingness to it. So where are you in the history of the landscape that we're living in, and step into that? So it does take study. You need to know what others have written about. And they'll adjust what you're thinking. You can't just be reading whatever came out the last 5 years. Yeah. Right.
I love a phrase you use. You say, I'm seated at my desk trying to learn love's language and its cadence. Love's language and its cadence. A couple of questions. One is, you've kind of been answering this question all along, but I just want to hear you talk about it a little bit more. What's the connection between love and writing? And I realize your book is about bigger things in writing, but my podcast is not. My podcast is about writing. So I'm going to get you to talk about writing with, love and writing. Mm-hmm. And then that word cadence, I wonder, what do you mean when you talk about the love's cadence? And if whether or not that's distinct from love's language?
All right, we'll give this a go. Jonathan, I think it was when I first started writing, the temptation to write for the world is so great.
Mm-hmm.
And even if I was on my best day, not thinking in terms of fame, I was thinking in terms of a really large audience.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the work I did, the writing I did when I was thinking of a really large audience was not my best work.
Mm-hmm.
It never was, even if I gave it just the best I could do. But as soon as I started thinking about 2 or 3 people that I thought this book would be helpful for, in this case, my daughter, but I have 5 kids. So even as I was writing it, I'm thinking in terms of my youngest, who just loves to draw, right? My oldest, who loves to write, my second oldest, who's into photography. So they just have their own kinds of expression. But that narrowing of the scope, not the scope, the target audience down to 2, 3, 4 people, then I can speak with a specificity and an authenticity and an intimacy that is the expression of love, right? If we love people, those are the things that we see in one another when we go, we love that guy, right?
Yeah.
So I think writers have got to learn to pick. So stories, for example, people who write fiction, it doesn't matter. Pick those 3 or 4 people you're like, I think they would like this story. You write it for your own enjoyment first, but you write it for these other 2 or 3 people and just add, I think they would enjoy it. And then you'll write your best stuff. When it comes to cadence, I've told one of the conversations I've had with my daughters is that when you interact with other people, you need to learn what their pace is. Some people, they move and think at a pace that is lickety split, and others are just plotters, right? They're just slow. If you're going to love people, then you need to step into their walking pace of life, thinking pace, and love them by not saying, hey, you need to catch up to me. You need to be at my speed. No, you need to step in and go, okay, where are they right now and how are they doing and how can I walk at their speed? And it's no different than just when you're with a friend taking a walk. You figure out what is that cadence and you walk at that cadence. And you can't do that with 1 million people, right? 1,000 people, but you can do that with a handful. And then what I found is that as soon as I find the cadence with those 2 or 3 or 4 people, then somehow it has an attraction to more than that. More people go, okay, that's me. That's my cadence. And I feel love coming through the writing that way.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, I think there's so much wisdom in saying, I'm not writing for the world. It
takes the pressure off.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also don't, even the books and stories that the world goes crazy for are not because the writer sat down and said, what is the world going to go crazy for?
Right.
I mean, Harry Potter, there was no market for wizard stories, wizarding school stories. That wasn't because J.K. Rowling said, let's see, what are people really looking for, right? People don't know what they're looking for. They don't know it until they see it. And you bring what you can bring. Yeah. And which seems, so relevant to some of the things you've been talking about before. When you said it, I'm not G.K. Chesterton. I'm not Lewis. In your case, you could say I'm Ben Palpant. In my case, I would say I'm Jonathan Rogers. And that's all we've got. That's all we've got to bring.
Yeah. I don't remember, Jonathan, the name. I love this guy. He's a Frenchman, last century, probably over on my shelf somewhere over there. Mauriac. I don't even know if that's how you say his name.
Right.
I think he was the one who said, I don't choose the color palette of my stories. It's just the way God made me. And I don't even necessarily like the color palette of my stories, but it's what I have. And God has used every experience in my life to build that color palette in such a way that I can do my best and offer what I've got, but it's not for the millions of people. It's for whoever God intends that multiplication to land for. I had Jerry Sitzer is a mentor of mine. He wrote A Grace Disguised years ago, dealing with his suffering. It's an incredible book, but I gave him my memoir really early on. And I thought, well, if anybody will be honest with me, it's Jerry. He's a straight shooter. So he thoroughly loved the book, but one of his advices, which I've never forgotten, was the number of likes, the number of positive reviews is no indication on the quality of a book. It just tells you who's been in touch with it. But quality work is not always indicated by, it's got 1,000, 5,000 reviews.
And how has that changed the way you think about your work, that bit of advice?
Well, on my good days, it's freed me up to just be me, not read reviews, but every author longs for those positive reviews, right? I mean, So yeah, we read them. I try not to read them too much, but give myself a few weeks between reading reviews. But you go on to see, is it still being reviewed? And then, of course, when you do that, it's always humbling to land on that 1-star review. That ends up being, well, yeah, that's, honey, you shouldn't read this book because it's not for you. So.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Real quickly, I say real quick, I'm asking you a very deep question, asking you real quickly, because we are sort of getting close to the end of our time. Prayer and writing. Talk to me about prayer and writing. You have a whole, at least one chapter on the topic.
Yeah. So I think it was A.W. Tozer, who it was said that he would write on his knees as a posture of that kind of conversing with God. And you can hear it in the way he writes. There is, in my opinion, there's a humility, a tenderness, a receptivity that is taking that divine and extending it out without denying the truth, right? We're not just out to make something beautiful. We want it to be true. And so I think the short answer to that is read the book. But truly, I think writers need to approach their desk, their laptop, in a prayerful mode. It doesn't mean it's always serious, right? So if prayer is truly conversation with God that's constant, we're just talking to the Lord, then there's just so many funny things in life that we should be talking to God about, not just the heartache, heavy stuff. So even humor, even the things that are just lighthearted, there needs to be an approach to that says, Lord, use me as your vessel. I want to be a viaduct of life to other people. And the only way that's going to happen, I mean, who gives us our ideas? If God's truly sovereign, then he's giving me ideas, and I need to steward those gifts and those ideas and do the best work I can, craft something beautiful. But that's going to take a lot of prayer and the grace of God just to make that work.
Yeah. I love the reminder that this isn't our best stuff isn't coming from inside us. We have to be in a posture that leaves room for grace to go beyond, however brilliant you are,
right? If
you're depending on your brilliance, you're topping out at your own brilliance.
That's right.
It's just not enough.
Amen. Yeah. I don't want this to sound too esoteric, but there are times, Jonathan, I'm sure you face this, when you go back and read something you wrote 5 years ago and you think, I don't know how I did that.
Mm-hmm.
Painters talk about this all the time. I don't know how Lee Young Lee, the poet, who is mostly enigmatic to me, but I just love reading his stuff, talks about the humbling. The older he gets, the less he understands how poetry actually happens in the poet's mind and heart and comes out. It's just it's humbling and mysterious, and I'm hoping God will tell me more when I get to the other side. But I just am so grateful that some of that electricity, that divine electricity, could pass through my fingertips onto the page sometimes, just sometimes, enough for me to go, Lord, thank you. I'm so grateful to be part of that process.
Yeah. Great. All right. Last question.
Okay.
Who are the writers who make you want to write?
I've got a list of them, but it's usually the person I read lately, right?
Yeah, right.
But Steinbeck, I'm a late bloomer with Steinbeck. I did not like him as a high schooler, probably because I was forced to read him.
Mm-hmm.
But I read East of Eden is just like the David of fiction for me, but in a different case. Like when I stand before the David, I'm just intimidated and I think, well, it's all done now. I can't possibly create something like that. But East of Eden, Steinbeck, he writes in such a way that I feel like, I can't do that. Mm-hmm. But I want to write something that has that kind of complexity and affection for the human heart, even as broken as it is. Mm-hmm. It's just incredible to me.
I've never read that book, by the way.
Oh my goodness! It's not an easy read, but it's incredible. And then I would, on a poetry level, of course, there's Rich Mullins. His music, I think he was one of the great poets of Christian music. Ray Bradbury and Flannery O'Connor, of course, just stunning to me in their own. They're so different. But I would add also Alan Patton, "Cry the Beloved Country."
Yeah, what a great book.
So there are some of those folks that they are so beyond me in their ability, but they invite. It's just that generative aspect. They invite me to write my own stories and do the best I can, and say, what did they do well? How can I learn from them? And I love those folks.
Yeah. Well, Ben Palpant, this has been so much fun. Thank you.
It's been
I hope a lot of people read your book, and I hope a lot of people benefit. I know your daughter. I'm glad you wrote it for your daughter, and that the rest of us get to look in on it. So thanks.
Amen. Thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate. Special thanks as well to Taylor Linhart for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorlinhart.com.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.